Barbie doll at the podium. The statement rang out cold as steel slicing through the stifling air of the congressional hearing room, and the entire space froze as if time had momentarily stopped. A few pens halted mid-sentence. A political aide jerked her head toward a microphone, her eyes wide with disbelief, because no one had expected such words to be spoken during a nationally televised hearing, let alone by a female Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat with. Unflinching eyes and a voice steady as stone staring down her opponent across the table. She didn't shout or slam her fist, but every word she spoke hit like a slap to the face of the opposite table. Caroline Leavitt, only 27 years old, and already a White House spokesperson with her blonde hair tied high and a bright pink skirt that made her look like she belonged on morning television, sat still as marble. Her ears rang, her hand locked tight around a water bottle as if it were the only anchor keeping her grounded. No one could had predicted that it would all begin with what sounded like a cheap insult, but would soon turn into a national wake-up call. The congressional hearing room was no longer just a room. It had become a political battleground. The rustling papers, the nervous tapping of pens, and the charged whispers blended into a storm of anticipation as the Education Reform Subcommittee launched into what would become a blistering debate over public school funding, an issue as old as it was unresolved. Jasmine Crockett sat brimming with energy, her eyes searing with a fire not born of recklessness, but from a deep and abiding anger at injustice. "We're talking about kids who don't even have a decent book," she declared, her voice ringing out like a bell in the suddenly silent room. "Don't sit there reading numbers like they'll teach kids to read." Her words were not just heard, they were felt slicing through the fog of bureaucracy. A few members of Congress nodded faintly, in agreement, while a reporter at the back tightened their grip on a pen, sensing the arrival of a pivotal moment. Jasmine wasn't simply speaking. She was burning illusions to the ground with truth harvested from failing classrooms and forgotten children across from her. Caroline Leavitt, poised, youthful, but with the weathered eyes of someone who had already weathered 1,000 criticisms, adjusted her seat, the overhead lights catching the glint of her polished high ponytail like a crown. She didn't rush to respond. Instead, her voice dropped to a tone that was cold and exact. "I understand your emotions, Congresswoman." She began every syllable deliberate, like the opening move in a high-stakes chess match. 60% of the education budget is lost to poor management. We need transparent audits before pouring in more money, or we'll never reach the children. Emotion may inspire, but efficiency creates change. She then calmly pulled a report from her stack, quoting statistics. Like a general deploying armored reinforcements, every figure was a precision strike aimed at deflating emotional appeals and establishing the supremacy of logic. The room shifted its attention, now locked onto her not by volume, but by command. Jasmine Crockett didn't yield. She leaned forward, her voice rising with forced transparency. "You're quoting numbers, while children are studying under tin roofs." Her attack was sharp, visceral, designed to puncture Caroline's seeming disconnect from lived reality. A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. More heads nodding swept into the heat of Crockett's righteous anger. The chair tried to restore order with a gavel strike, but it was barely a blip in the rising storm. Caroline met the chaos with a smirk, as if Crockett's words had bounced off her armor control. "If Congresswoman Crockett truly cares about tin roofs, then answer this: how do you ensure the budget doesn't vanish?" Along the way, she fired back, her voice slicing the air, her gaze locked on Jasmine, daring her to answer. As a reporter whispered to a colleague, "This girls know." Pushover light applause broke out, small, but enough to spark tension. Crockett, visibly bristled, gripped the microphone, her voice shaking with fury. "Miss Leavitt, don't hide your lack of realism behind numbers." She nearly shouted. "Education isn't an accounting game." Her cries scorched the atmosphere, drawing sympathetic nods from a few peers. But Caroline remained unbothered, flipping a page like brushing aside an insect. "If Congresswoman Crockett wants, I'll bring the truth," she replied, her voice ironclad, her stare dagger sharp. Their exchange was no longer political. It was gladiatorial, a clash not only of ideas, but personas. Crockett, hardened by the battlefield of politics, wanted to rattle Caroline and strip away her composed image. Caroline, often dismissed for her appearance, was determined to prove she was more than a Barbie in power. The chair pounded the gavel again, trying to restore calm, but instead only added to the pressure cooker building in the chamber. The hearing was boiling Over every glance, every phrase now a battle move, a furnace of tension, surrounded the two women. Caroline, with her icy restraint, clutched her documents. Like weapons, Jasmine, with her fiery conviction, held the microphone. Like a sword, reporter scribbled furiously, breathless, anticipating the moment that would tip the scale. Jasmine sees it, raising her voice. "We don't need more reports. Miss Leavitt, kids need schools, not numbers or statement." Thundered across the room, garnering more nods as emotion swelled in the chamber. But Caroline didn't flinch. If Congresswoman Crockett wants schools, explain why 40% of the education budget vanishes every year. She retorted with surgical precision. Her question pierced Jasmine's argument, cleanly causing the room to stir again. A congressman leaned to a colleague. "This girl's not easily bullied." Cornered by numbers, Jasmine felt a rush of blood to her head, her pulse pounding from the applause that Caroline had managed to draw in a split second. Lapse of judgment. She leaned into the microphone and muttered Barbie at the podium. What does she know about schools? The insult meant to be quiet echoed to the live mic like a shot. The room went still. Reporters gasped, pens scratching faster. Staffers exchanged shocked glances, and the C-SPAN cameras immortalized the moment in full clarity. Caroline heard every syllable, her fists clenched until her knuckles turned white, and the smirk she wore vanished, replaced by a look so sharp it could cut. Still a memory surged in her mind of a time 2 years earlier, when a male colleague had laughed during her presentation, calling her a talking doll. She had stayed quiet back, then choosing instead to work harder to rise, and now Crockett had ripped open that wound. But she didn't explode. She inhaled steady, her eyes never leaving Crockett, locking and not with rage, but with chilling calculation. Inside her, something turned, not vengeance, not fury, but a strategy quietly forming. Crockett, oblivious to what she'd done, continued speaking, her voice steel. "We need action, not polished speeches." Thinking she had just won the round, not realizing she had lit a match in a room full of gasoline. Members of Congress glanced nervously, some shaking their heads, others staring at Caroline, waiting for her response. The chair tried again to call for order, but the gavel now seemed a distant drum, drowned the roar of what had just been unleashed. Reporters' phones buzzed. Social media lit up with a viral clip tagged Barbie at the podium, sparking furious debate. Some cheered Crockett, "She's right, Leavitt's just a blonde puppet." Others recoiled, appalling sexist low blow. Caroline, unaware of the wildfire forming online, jotted a quiet note, her eyes still fixed on her opponent. Like a lion studying its prey, Crockett, still standing tall, basked in what she thought was a victorious moment, unaware that the storm was building around her. A staffer by the door checked their phone and whispered, "She's done for." But Crockett, emboldened, kept pushing. "We need schools, not political theater," thinking she had already secured her win. As Caroline's gaze turned to steel, she was preparing a response, not just to reclaim the room, but to dominate the narrative. The hearing now felt like a smoldering battlefield, and the air still hung thick with the insult that refused to fade. Caroline's presence grew heavy, like a tidal wave, ready to strike. The chair, voice taut with tension, turned to her. "Miss Leavitt, please continue." Caroline stood calm, unshaken, a force coiled, and ready to be unleashed. She stepped forward, her hands resting lightly on the podium, her eyes sweeping across the room, and then zeroing in on Jasmine Crockett for one long second, as if etching a declaration of war into the air. "I'm not here to be anyone's doll," she began, her voice quiet, but rising with devastating gravity. "I'm here to dismantle the lie that says competence wears a tie to play appearance games." She began with voice low but razor sharp, like a knife slicing through the air, declaring she was there for the kids, for education, for the future, and she would not let anyone, not even a congresswoman, diminish that. Her words, like a bullet, struck Crockett and prompted whispers in the room, with one nearby Congress member muttering that she wasn't messing around. Leavitt, undeterred, shifted to her argument, calling for a transparent budget and citing fresh data that revealed how $2 billion in education funds were lost to mismanagement the year prior. She proposed independent audits and direct allocations to schools as she flipped through her documents, each page landing like a sword stroke, slashing through Crockett's emotional appeals. Reporters' pens raced to capture every word, sensing a shift in momentum. Leavitt, like a seasoned strategist, blended data with raw emotion, recounting her visit to a rural school where students sat on the floor and declaring that she didn't need a microphone to understand what they needed. That statement ignited applause, even from some who had previously backed Crockett. Crockett, feeling the tide turn, gripped her microphone, her eyes flashing with panic and anger. She stood and cut Leavitt off, accusing her of hiding behind sob stories and demanding immediate budget allocation. dismissing further reports. Though her voice was forceful, it lacked its earlier confidence, like a warrior on defense. But Leavitt, not letting her regain ground, struck back with a piercing question asking why Crockett's plan lacked oversight if speed was so critical. The blow silenced Crockett, her eyes wavering. A reporter whispered that she was backed into a corner. In Crockett's mind, a memory surge of losing a crucial case years ago after letting emotion overtake her, a lesson in the dangers of impulsiveness. Yet now, facing Leavitt, that old fire flared again as she tried to regain footing, her voice rising with a call for action over questions. But her words, like a weak breeze, failed to overpower Leavitt's presence. The room leaned toward Leavitt, applauding after each of her sentences. Sensing her advantage, she delivered the final blow, locking eyes with Crockett and saying she didn't need to be called names to do her job, but if Crockett insisted, she could call her the one bringing solutions. That declaration, like thunder, electrified the room. Congress members, staff, even the chair couldn't look away as a staffer quietly recorded the moment, knowing it would go viral. The C-SPAN clip flooded social media, racking up shares as users posted reactions, some declaring Leavitt had crushed Crockett without raising her voice. Crockett stood frozen, her eyes burning into Leavitt, unable to find a retort. She sat down, gripping her chair as if suppressing rage, knowing deep down she had underestimated her opponent. Yet she refused to let Leavitt win uncontested. She signaled to her aide with eyes that commanded a press conference be prepared to reclaim the narrative. Reporters scribbled faster, sensing a new battle was about to unfold outside the room. The chair's gavel pounding for order was barely audible above the emotional storm. Leavitt sat with her gaze fixed on Crockett, like a fighter who won the first round but knew the battle was far from over. She jotted quick notes, eyes flashing with resolve, already mapping her next strategy. The room still vibrated with Leavitt's power, but Crockett, though on the defensive, had no plans to surrender. She whispered to her aide that Leavitt hadn't won yet. From Congress members to C-SPAN viewers, everyone sensed the fight was spilling into the open, and the nation was watching to see who would land the final blow. Outside the room, a media storm erupted. The C-SPAN clip featuring Crockett's insult and Leavitt's counter ignited debate across social platforms. Some users blasted Crockett for calling Leavitt a Barbie, while others defended her. A reporter dispatched a story titled, "The Crockett-Leavitt Clash Won't Stop." In the press room, staff scrambled to prepare for the impending showdown. Crockett, standing before a mirror in a break room, adjusted her jacket and rehearsed her speech silently, firm in her resolve to show no weakness, only a new offensive. Her aide entered, reporting that the press room was ready. Reporters had gathered. Crockett nodded, her gaze steely, determined to prove she never falls. She stepped out like a warrior entering the ring. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner, Leavitt recorded a short video on her phone, her voice low but resolute as she said it was not about appearances, but about kids, education, and solutions. She sent it to her media team with instructions to post immediately, understanding that public perception was a battlefield she couldn't afford to abandon. An aide watching the video remarked she was in the lead, but Leavitt, eyes glued to her screen, muttered that Crockett wouldn't stop, and neither would she. She began preparing a longer speech to post that night, aimed at solidifying her stance. In the press room, Crockett stood at the podium, cameras flashing as she spoke with conviction, asserting that she was there for students, not drama, and that theoretical plans wouldn't save schools. Her words, though not naming Leavitt directly, were a targeted gust of critique. When asked about the insult, she deflected, saying she had said what was necessary to defend education. Some viewers cheered her defiance. Others demanded an apology. Leavitt, watching the live stream, was visibly angry. She quickly drafted a response video detailing her journey and education plan, instructing her media team to post it immediately after the conference. She knew even seconds mattered now, as the storm had spilled.